Hi there, Musitrature Recaps back with another breakdown. Today, I'm explaining the sci-fi thriller, Snowpiercer. The movie's backdrop is the near future, where an Earth devastated by a failed scientific experiment has turned into a frozen wasteland. Humanity finds refuge aboard a perpetual moving train. The train compartments are divided between the affluent elite enjoying luxury and the impoverished masses fighting daily for survival. This stark division fuels the impoverished's thoughts of a violent uprising. The narrative unfolds 17 years post the ecological catastrophe. Military personnel enter one of the train compartments to conduct a headcount of the residents. The people present appear worn and unkempt, marking them as inhabitants of the lower-class cars. The soldiers order them to sit, and they comply, except for a man named Curtis who defies their command. After a while, Curtis sits beside his friend Edgar and informs him of counting the soldiers. One of the checking soldiers inquires if anyone among the residents can play the violin. An elderly couple steps forward, and the man explains they were symphony orchestra players in the past. The soldier examines their hands and chooses the man to accompany him, leaving the wife behind. The man protests, but the soldier forcibly removes him, mistreating the wife. The military hands out protein briquettes as a substitute for their usual food. Curtis searches for the briquettes, which conceal a message from an informant. A woman named Tanya signals him and indicates her son Tim's briquette. Curtis persuades the boy to exchange the briquette for a soccer ball he can enjoy all day. The note reveals the name of a security expert incarcerated in the train's prison car. With the guidance of the head of the lower-class compartment, Gilliam, Curtis engages in discussions about a revolution plan. The strategy involves making their way to the front of the train with the assistance of the security expert and gaining control over the main engine. This move would allow the oppressed rear car occupants to overthrow the wealthy tycoon Wilford, thus dismantling the oppressive social hierarchy forever. During the night, soldiers forcefully enter their compartment once more, rounding up all the children for a medical checkup. A woman in yellow approaches the kids and measures their height. She selects Tim and another boy, disregarding their parents' efforts to protect them. One of the boy's fathers hurls a shoe at the woman in an attempt to save his child. As retribution, his hand is thrust into an external hole, causing it to freeze. While the man's hand turns icy, Mrs. Mason, the train's minister, enters the carriage. She delivers a lecture to the passengers about the necessity of adhering to the orders and regulations set by the privileged class. After a period, the frostbitten hand of the transgressor is pulled back inside and brutally smashed with a hammer, echoing throughout the compartment with his agonizing cries. From the rear of the wagon, Gilliam approaches the soldiers and expresses his desire to converse with Wilford. As an old acquaintance of Wilford's, Gilliam is treated respectfully by the woman, who also instructs the soldiers to lower their useless firearms. Curtis seizes on this remark and informs Gilliam that the soldiers are out of ammunition. He is convinced that their ammunition was expended during the previous uprising. During the evening meal distribution, the passengers voice their discontent about the flavorless protein briquettes. In an effort to quell the uprising, the soldiers threaten to execute one of the elderly men. This proves to be the breaking point, prompting Curtis to initiate a rebellion. He rushes towards a soldier, brandishing his rifle at himself and pulling the trigger. However, no shot is fired, which serves as a signal for the lower-class residents to launch their attack. With enthusiasm, the rebels advance to the adjacent wagon, using a battering ram to overcome the guards in their path. They seize the keys to the prison cells from one of the guards, where Namgung Minsu, the very specialist previously mentioned by an informant, is incarcerated. He is the mastermind behind the locks and security systems throughout the train. The insurgents attempt to persuade Namgung to join their revolt and lead them to the front of the train. However, the engineer is not easily convinced and makes a demand. He asks for 2 doses of the drug Cronola for each unlocked door, both for himself and his daughter Yona. This extraordinary girl possesses the ability of clairvoyance, enabling her to foresee what awaits them behind each new train door. With Namgung's guidance, the rebels advance to the subsequent carriage, which they find completely vacant. As they approach the windows of the car, they witness sunlight for the first time in years and observe the world outside. In fascination, they watch as their train speeds past a frozen, lifeless city. In the subsequent carriage, the revolutionaries come across an old acquaintance named Paul, who now produces protein bars for the less privileged. Curtis decides to delve into the composition of their food, only to regret his curiosity almost immediately. It's revealed that the protein briquettes are actually made from ground and compressed insects. While inspecting the area, Curtis finds a fresh note bearing the word water, which prompts a change in their strategy. Realizing that control over the water compartment grants them negotiation leverage with Wilford, they adjust their plan. As Namgung attempts to breach another door, his daughter Yona experiences a vision of heavily armed elite guards up ahead, complicating their path. With no option to retreat, Namgung disables the wires, forcing the poor passengers to confront the impending enemy. A brutal and intense clash unfolds between the rebels and the elite guards. Curtis seizes an axe from one of the guards, seeking retribution for the years of suffering he endured in the train's poverty-stricken section. The chaos is momentarily halted by the conductor, who announces through a horn that they are approaching the Catherine Bridge, signifying the arrival of New Year's Eve. The guards cease hostilities to celebrate the holiday. The urge to continue the fight is disrupted by Minister Mason, who delivers another impassioned speech accusing the lower class of ingratitude towards Wilford. Overwhelmed by anger, Curtis hurls an axe at the woman, narrowly missing. In response, the guards equip themselves with night vision goggles. Namgun insults the rioters, labeling them as mindless fools, and reveals the presence of a lengthy tunnel right after the Catherine Bridge. The battle intensifies with renewed energy. The rebels attempt to protect themselves against the opposing forces, but suffer significant casualties. With victory seeming almost out of reach, Curtis recalls a young boy who has matches. He raises his voice to the highest pitch, stressing the need for light, and his shout resonates throughout the adjacent train cars. The boy ingeniously crafts a makeshift torch, which ignites a flame passed on to other passengers. Fueled by anger and determination, the impoverished men rejoin the battle with newfound enthusiasm, turning the tide in their favor. Mason, observing the unfolding skirmish, gets stabbed in the leg. This becomes a golden opportunity for Curtis to seize the woman and gain control over the guards. Yet, behind him, on the opposite side of the wagon, he notices his friend Edgar caught by one of the criminals. Curtis confronts a crucial choice: save his friend or prioritize the freedom fighters. A decision is reached, leading Curtis to take the minister hostage while the guard fatally injures Edgar. Mason frantically orders the guards to surrender their weapons. The captured water wagon serves as a means for the rioters to cleanse themselves of bloodstains. Meanwhile, the rioters subject Mason to interrogation. Despite her lack of substantial information, the woman informs Curtis that she's been surveilling him for a long time. She's aware that he won't jeopardize his men's lives by cutting off the water supply to the entire train. She proposes a deal to spare her life and pledges to guide them safely through security to the foremost carriage. During the night, Gilliam suggests to Curtis that they halt their progress to prevent further casualties. However, Curtis remains resolute in his determination to push forward. He entrusts the care of his weary and injured comrades to the elderly man, while he assembles a small team and embarks on their journey together. The impoverished individuals stumble upon new train carriages, discovering the luxuries they had been deprived of for countless years. They come to realize that they had been confined to the rear of the train all this time. Among the newly found carriages is one housing a massive aquarium where seafood is cultivated. Mason proposes that the rebels sample the sushi, a delicacy prepared only twice annually to preserve the delicate balance of the aquarium's ecosystem. Following the meal, Mason leads the group to another carriage functioning as a classroom for the train's inhabitants. The students in attendance are exclusively the offspring of the initial class, with no rebellious children among them. A propaganda video about Wilford and the perpetual journey of the train is presented, followed by a teacher leading the children in a biased hymn. Concluding the lesson, the teacher introduces the youngsters to the IC-7, a term referring to the initial rebels who leaped off the train during its early years. The teacher repetitively imparts to the children that certain death awaits outside, echoing like a mantra. The group of underprivileged children prepares to continue their journey when an unexpected visitor arrives in the classroom, a New Year's gift delivery person, accompanied by the violinist from the story's beginning. The delivery person distributes hard-boiled eggs as presents to all present, seemingly oblivious to the presence of the poor individuals amidst the privileged. Among the eggs, Curtis discovers one with a note bearing the word blood. In a sudden twist, the gift bearer retrieves a gun concealed beneath the eggs and opens fire on the disadvantaged group. Simultaneously, the teacher reveals a machine gun from the gift basket, attempting to subdue the rebels. Yet, her endeavors, and her life, are swiftly ended by a precise throat stab. Abruptly, a live broadcast flashes on the television screen, revealing a guard callously executing Gilliam. Overwhelmed by grief at his mentor's demise, Curtis shoots the weeping Mason in the head. The surviving members of the skirmish proceed toward the elite train cars, encountering bewildered wealthy passengers along their path. Before long, Curtis's team faces off against guards once more, emerging victorious once again. However, the sweetness of triumph is soured by the loss of another rebel during the confrontation, while Tanya sustains life-threatening injuries. In her final moments, she beseeches her companions to locate her son Tim. Among the rebels, only Namgun, Yona, and Curtis remain. In solemn silence, they advance alongside the train carriages. They come across the high-ranking officials, engaged in a revelry of dance and debauchery, oblivious to the plight of those at the train's rear. Along the route, Namgun and Yona pilfer drugs and warm clothing from the officials. Ultimately, the rebels find themselves facing a door leading to the train's main engine room, presided over by Wilford himself. Curtis implores Namgun to unlock the door leading to the front carriage, but Namgun holds entirely different intentions. Curtis shares his past experiences growing up in the tail section of the train with his companion. In those earlier days, when protein briquettes were scarce, the desperate poor resorted to cannibalism. It was during this time that Curtis learned the unsettling truth that infant meat was considered the most palatable, a knowledge he deeply despises himself for possessing. This is why Curtis is driven to confront Wilford and seek retribution for the suffering endured by the lower class. Namgun reveals that he has been gathering chronol, a material used for creating explosives, with the intention of using it to blast open the door to the outside world. According to his observations, Earth is gradually warming, offering humanity a potential chance of survival beyond the train's confines. Namgun intends to ignite the explosive fuse, but a mysterious woman dressed in black emerges from the first carriage, shoots Namgun, and extends an invitation for Curtis to dine with Wilford. Within the first carriage, Curtis finally encounters the man who has been haunting him throughout the years. The steward of the engine discloses that Curtis is the first among the rebels to face him. It is revealed that the orchestration of all the uprisings was a collaborative effort between him and Gilliam, designed to regulate the population dynamics and thereby maintain the train's delicate ecosystem. Originally conceived, the rebellion was intended to conclude at the Catherine Bridge, yet Curtis's revolution extended beyond those limits, leading to Gilliam's sacrifice. Meanwhile, outside the door, Namgun regains consciousness. He must single-handedly fend off an enraged group of high-ranking officials and a surviving guard, while Yona works to manipulate the wires and unlock the door. Wilford presents Curtis with the perpetual motion machine and hands him a final note bearing the word train. He urges the rebel to take his position and assume control of both the train and its inhabitants, convincing Curtis that this is the morally just course of action. Yona manages to reach the first carriage and rushes to Curtis for matches, yet he, swayed by Wilford's influence, repels her. In response, Yona begins using a fork to pry up the tiles on the floor, revealing a child situated behind the ceaselessly turning machinery. Wilford elucidates that to sustain the train's operation, he requires children under the age of 5 to operate within the mechanisms. This revelation is the breaking point for Curtis. He incapacitates Wilford and sacrifices his own hand to disrupt the machinery's circuitry. Passing a match to Yona, Curtis retrieves the child from the machinery's confines. Yona ignites the fuse. Curtis and Namgun shield the children from the ensuing explosion with their bodies. The shockwave triggers an avalanche that descends upon the train, causing some carriages to plunge into the abyss before the motion halts completely. Swathed in fur coats, Yona and the rescued child venture outside, making their first steps onto solid ground. Ahead lies a harsh, frigid environment and the struggle for survival. However, a glimmer of hope emerges. In the distance, the children spot a polar bear, signifying that animals have managed to adapt and endure in the new world. And here the movie ends. Thank you for watching.